There's just something about attics, right? They're not like basements, all damp and dark. No, the attic it's the space right over our heads, a place where we shove things we've forgotten about and where we hear those strange little noises in the middle of the night. Today we're going to dive into 3 true stories from the attic that just don't have an easy explanation. And we're going to start with a feeling I bet is pretty familiar.
I mean, that one line just hits you, doesn't it? It perfectly sums up the specific kind of dread in our first story. It's that deep, primal fear that you're being watched, that you're not alone in a place that's supposed to be empty. And that feeling, it's what kicks off a series of events that get weirder and weirder.
All right, so for our first case, we're not starting with some big event. We're starting with the place itself. The person telling the story describes their childhood attic as, well, anything but normal. This wasn't some tiny little crawl space. This was a huge, confusing space that just felt wrong right from the get-go.
And all these things, they kind of came together to create this really unsettling vibe. See, it was big, but because of this weird maze of wooden beams, you could never actually see the whole room at once. The floor was all uneven, so it was actually kind of dangerous to walk around up there. It was basically the perfect place for someone or something to hide, which is exactly what this kid was afraid of.
Okay, so let's get into the actual case file here. What kicks off as just a weird little childhood habit, it pretty quickly spins out into something way, way more terrifying. The narrator's parents, they had a pretty simple explanation for everything, but the evidence, it just doesn't line up.
And the way this escalates, it is absolutely chilling. It starts small, with something that's just confusing. Dirty feet, no big deal, right? But then, things start coming down from the attic. A box of photos shows up, then a lamp. Each time, it gets a little bigger, building this creeping sense of dread until, bam, the big moment. He wakes up, standing, in the one place he is absolutely terrified of.
So here's the real problem, right? You've got 2 competing ideas. On one hand, okay, maybe it's sleepwalking. Kids do that. But the details, they just don't fit. How does a kid walk through that dangerous, maze-like attic in pitch-black darkness and not get a single scratch? And more importantly, what about the footsteps he heard? Footsteps that were coming from somewhere else in the attic with him.
Which leaves us with the big question, What was really going on up there in the dark? Was this just a really, really weird series of sleepwalking events? Or was that feeling of not being alone more than just a feeling?
All right, let's move on to case number 2. This one also kicks off with a mystery, but it's a totally different flavor. We're shifting away from that feeling of being watched and toward the discovery of a physical object, a journal that tells the story of someone who used to live in the house and their slow descent into madness, all because of the attic.
And this is where the obsession really takes hold. And it's not what you'd think. It's not about ghosts or monsters. It starts with a math problem. The person who wrote this journal, they measured the attic over and over and over again, and they became completely convinced that a few feet of space along one wall just shouldn't be missing. It was an architectural impossibility.
So you start with this logical puzzle, and then the paranoia creeps in. The writers start spending all of their time in the attic, just listening, and they start writing down these faint sounds they think are coming from inside that missing space. Scratching noises, the sound of breathing, things that suggest something is alive inside the walls.
And this is just the end of the road for this person's sanity. Language is just gone. The journal, which started with these super detailed measurements and observations, just dissolves into nothing but page after page of tally marks, counting something. We just don't know what. It's a total breakdown right there on the page.
So the person telling this story finds this journal, and, they show their dad. And you'd think he'd just brush it off, right? But he doesn't. He actually gets interested. The chain of events that happens next is just wild. It goes from finding this old box, to reading the journal, to the dad just deciding, you know what? Let's tear it on the wall and see what's back there.
And what they find, it's impossible. Seriously, the journal writer was right all along. There was a hidden room. But the walls are covered in these weird black symbols and shapes, and there's no door, no way in, no way out. So, how did the marks get there? And maybe the weirdest part of all, why were the journal's crazy, frantic notes found so neatly organized in a box inside? It almost suggests someone else found them and put them there.
Okay, get ready for our final case. And this one is probably the most intense,
the most visceral of the three. There's no old journal, there's no slow psychological burn. This one starts with just a quick glance, and it ends with a violent, physically impossible mess.
So picture this. The narrator is just doing his nightly thing, walking around his property. He glances up at the little attic window, a window he's seen 1,000 times before, and for just a split second, he thinks he sees something move in the dark. He brushes it off, but, you know, that feeling sticks with you.
But the next night, he sees it again. And this time, he knows he's not imagining it. So he goes inside, climbs up the ladder to the attic, and this is what he finds. The entire place is completely trashed. And the walls, they're smeared with this thick, wet, black paint. It looks like it happened just moments before he got there.
So he runs downstairs, grabs a knife, total fight mode, and just charges back up there, screaming, ready for whatever it is. He starts tearing the place apart, looking for whoever did this. But there's no one. The attic is completely, totally empty. There's nowhere to hide. It's just empty. And then, in the silence, as the adrenaline starts to fade, he realizes something has changed. The room isn't the same as it was just a couple of minutes ago when he first came up. The intruder might be gone, but it seems they left one final thing behind. He sees these fresh, deep scratch marks gouged into the wood. But here's the kicker. They're on top of the wet paint. Now think about that. For that to happen, the scratches had to have been made after he first found the paint, in the few seconds he was downstairs grabbing the knife, all while the room was supposedly empty. It makes no sense. Okay, so let's take a step back. What do we even do with these three stories? We've got a sleepwalker who hears footsteps that aren't his own, we have a crazy person's journal that turns out to be 100% accurate, and we have a trashed attic with evidence that just can't exist. Let's try and see what ties all of these bizarre events together. When you lay them all out like this, a really disturbing pattern starts to pop up. Every single case has a central mystery that just breaks logic. Each one has an official response, from parents or even the cops, who either just dismiss it all or are basically powerless to explain it. And the most important part? Each story leaves this permanent scar, a lifelong fear, a puzzle that can never be solved, and this deep-seated belief that something else, something unexplained, was there in the dark with them.
And I guess that's really where this leaves us, right? Maybe the real horror isn't about some spooky place like an attic. Maybe the truly terrifying thing is the holes in the story. It's those little details that just refuse to fit, the evidence that screams, this shouldn't be possible, and that chilling feeling you get when you realize some questions just don't have an answer, and maybe they never will.